The second half of 3.1 has just dropped, and with it comes Nilou. In this video I want to do a complete overview and analysis of her kit. This will also include the best artifacts, weapons, and team comps. And while it is difficult to give a direct answer on whether or not you should pull for her simply because it's so subjective, I will give you all the key information, and I'll also conclude the video with whether or not I regret pulling for her. Now without further ado, let's get into her kit. Nilou is a Hydro Sword user following the recent trend of other Hydro characters and heavily speccing into HP. She just takes it one step further by requiring 80,000 HP to completely maximize her potential. I am getting a bit ahead of myself though, so let me first get into what her skill and burst is, and then I'll talk about her passives. Her skill is Dance of Haft-Karsvar. It has an 18-second cooldown and is the major engine of her kit. Now just looking at this text, it looks kind of complicated, but essentially you will activate the skill initially and have the option to either use normal attacks or pressing the skill again. This is an important distinction to make, as continuing to use her skill press versus using the normal attacks is the difference between whether you are utilizing her as a off-field or on-field DPS. If you use normal attacks, you are going to get an on-field buff, and if you continue using the skill press, you will get a Hydro Aura following the last E. This aura works on the active character and lasts 12 seconds. This skill and her passives are very closely connected, but let me first cover her burst. Her burst is Dance of Abzendeji, Distant Dreams Listening Spring, and that is the only time I will ever say that. Overall, it's a pretty basic ultimate. It scales off HP like everything else in her kit. It has 70 energy cost with an 18-second cooldown, fine damage, decent radius. It does hit twice for hydro damage, but there's really not much to say about it, so I'm just going to move on to her passives. So this is where things get really interesting with this character. Passive 1 is Court of Dancing Petals. It is a mountain of text, so let me break it down step by step. When there is only Hydro and Dendro units in the party, and at least one of each, after using the final attack of her skill, she grants nearby allies the Golden Chalice's bounty for 30 seconds, which grants 100 elemental mastery, but more importantly, changes Dendro cores into bountiful cores. In the simplest of terms, these bountiful cores are basically Dendro cores on steroids. These bountiful cores explode in 0.5 seconds, have a much larger radius, and due to her second passive, can have some crazy damage. Now the downside of these cores is they don't work with Hyper Bloom, and also the previously mentioned Hydro or Dendro unit restriction is quite ridiculous. These bountiful cores are still considered Dendro cores by the game's mechanics, so for example, they cannot crit and they still do damage you. I briefly mentioned the large amount of HP this character requires in the beginning of the video, and now we are going to move on to why that is with her second passive. Passive 2, Dreamy Dance of Ions, is a lot simpler than the last one, so I probably don't even really need to explain it, but I'll briefly mention it. So every 1000 HP over 30,000 on Nilou increases the bountiful core damage by 9%, and the max this buff can go is 400%. These two passives are probably the two most restrictive and demanding passives that I've seen in the game so far, so I could understand why this might rub some people the wrong way, but the damage does make up for it if you really spec into it. Alrighty, so now I just want to briefly analyze Nilou's constellations. I don't have them and I'm not going for them. It's really hard to convince me at this point in the game to go for constellations, but I know some people care, so I'll briefly mention it. Her C1 gives a general boost to her skill in both the on-field and off-field department. On-field gets a damage increase, and off-field allows for 100% uptime now, so that's nice, but like I said, I don't think it's necessary. Her C2 gives Hydro and Dendro resistant shred to further improve the bountiful core damage. Her C4 improves energy requirements, and her C6 can really just help the whales make her a better DPS unit. I know that was fairly brief, but I haven't done many calculations and I obviously haven't tested the constellations, so I can't really give that much opinion on it. I think they're okay. They're just too expensive for me personally. Overall, I think her kit is very interesting. The fact it changes a core mechanic of the game in a fun and a way I find satisfying made her a character I was really interested in. If I had to guess where she ends up, I think she best fits the role as an off-field DPS, and especially going forward when there's more Dendro characters to flex the team comps a little bit more, I think that's where she'll really stand. Alright, 5 minutes in and I'm finally getting to the weapon section. I'm not gonna lie, this one is gonna be pretty depressing, so I'm just gonna jump right in. Firstly, I want to say I haven't even really explained how exactly these max HP numbers are going to be reached, because most people would know that getting 70,000 is not really that easy, and it comes from this weapon right here. I'm just going to refer to this weapon as the key, but this weapon is no joke. It's probably the largest gap between best in slot and second best in slot the game has ever seen. This sword at level 90 gives 86% HP, and the second best in slot, Primordial Jade Cutter, only grants a flat 20%. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, there is no other sword in the game currently that gives a HP percent buff as a substat. With there being no 4 stars that grant HP, it makes this sword, while I will say there is no weapon that is a must pull, like I said, the gap here is immense. And I haven't even mentioned the key's passive that allows for a large team-wide EM boost. Now that's not to say that the key is a perfect weapon. For a 5-star, it is very niche, and it really only works on 2 characters, one obviously being Nilou and the other being Kuki Shinobu. So because of how expensive 5-star weapons can be, you have to really decide whether it's worth it for you. And there are some decent 4-star weapon options right now. They're not perfect, but let me cover those. So the first, and what I think is the best 4-star currently for Nilou, is the new one, Xiphis Moonlight. It's on the same banner as Nilou's key, and it's overall just a really good weapon, not just for Nilou. It provides a team-wide boost in ER and gives EM as well. So her 2 second and third best stats are both getting boosted here, and also the team-wide boost is great. For those more free-to-play accounts or just people that don't want to touch the weapon banner at all, I would say the Iron Sting is the second best 4-star option anyway right now, because obviously there is no HP percent substat 4 stars, and EM is the second most important stat, and you can get it to R5 with relative ease. I mean, it's not going to cost you. So if you don't want to go on this banner, the Iron Sting is still a solid pick. To do a quick recap, I think it's pretty clear that the best in slot for her is the 5-star signature weapon, the key. Now, the second best in slot though, I know I said previously was the Primordial Jade Cutter. I'm not sold on that. I think either of these 4 stars are pretty comparable, just because the Primordial Jade Cutter gives crit rate for a substat, which Nilou really doesn't need, whereas these other weapons give EM. So I'll leave that up to you to decide, but I think it's worth noting that the Primordial Jade Cutter could be on a different character. On a more positive note for Nilou, the artifact options are a lot more flexible compared to the weapons. Before I get into which artifact sets you should build, I should briefly mention what stats she likes most. With everything I've gone over to this point, I think it's pretty clear my stance on her main stat options is really HP percent on everything you can have it on, and maximizing substats for HP percent is also a high priority. That's not to say she only wants HP though. She wants a little bit of everything, although I would say EM is the second highest priority because the cores do scale off EM. Thirdly is energy recharge. She does want some energy recharge, 150%. I wouldn't go past that. If you have C4, you don't really need any energy recharge, but how many people are going to get that? I lastly want to mention crit, just because I know how much people love crit. I really just don't see the value in crit with Nilou because her bountiful cores aren't going to crit, and while her ult and her skill does crit, it's just the damage there compared to building as much HP as possible. It's just not comparable. With that out of the way, let's get right into the artifact set options. Tenacity of the Millilith is a no-brainer for the 2-set bonus. It is really the only set that I would say is a requirement for Nilou. After the Tenacity set, there's several other options that you can put in the other slot. For 1 is either of the 2 EM sets. For 2 is the Heart of the Depths set, and for 3 is the Emblem of Severed Fate set. I would rank them in that specific order as well, just because I value EM the most. I would run that set primarily, but if you don't have those, the other 2 sets work fine as well. Alright, so we're on to the last part of the video before I give my final conclusions and thoughts. It's team comps, which is usually the lengthiest part of the video, but Nilou is in this really tough spot where I'm just questioning why they released her now. Because of her heavy restrictions with her passive, which only allows Dendro and Hydro, and because there's only 3 Dendro characters in the game right now, there's very little flex with her team comps. Firstly, I have to mention, because of the cores doing self-damage, you need a healer on your team. And it can't be a healer like Jincho because he doesn't provide enough healing. That leaves you with essentially Barbara or Kokomi. Because Mona with Prototype Amber also doesn't work and there's no Dendro healers. So already we're off to a very tough start, but it doesn't get much better from there. Tainari, he's too bursty with his Dendro application, so he's out. So that leaves the main team comp for now being Nilou, Kokomi, Kole, Dendro MC. Well, and Barbara instead of Kokomi, but I mean, come on, it's Barbara. I mean, seriously. That's how you know we're in a tough spot here. That's not to say this current team comp is bad. It functions decently. I'll get into the positives and the negatives in a second, but I just wanted to paint a picture of how rough it is right now for Nilou. Starting with the negatives of this team, I would say the energy regeneration is very meh. Dendro MC in particular has to have at least 200%. I would say if you have the Favonius Sword, you really need to run it to help alleviate these issues. I'm also running Prototype Amber on my Kokomi as well, so that's a big problem. Another glaring issue is because you can't have Animo characters, there's no grouping potential with this team comp. I hope they can address that down the road with either a Hydro or Dendro unit, but that's kind of more of a hope than anything. Now this isn't a negative, but it is a point of interest, is if you are running Kokomi over Barbara, you kind of have to decide who the main DPS is between Nilou and Kokomi. I would say Kokomi is slightly better, and if you're running Barbara, Nilou is slightly better. Alright, I feel like it kind of just went into a rant, but I do have some positives to add here as well, because there are actually a few. Firstly, before that, I just want to mention Hyperbloom versus Bountiful Core, where the team building is a bit different, because in Hyperbloom you kind of want one character just to stack all the EM because it's proccing the Hyperblooms, but in Bountiful Cores you kind of want everybody to have EM. And that's where this team has some synergy. Nilou's passive gives a team-wide EM boost. If you have the key, that gives a team-wide EM boost. If you have C4 Kole, that gives a team-wide EM boost. If you have the Elegy, that gives a team-wide EM boost. Dendro MC has a team-wide EM boost. Obviously, I just listed off several things that make this not very free-to-play friendly, but I think that's kind of clear that Nilou is kind of in that category anyway, so I wanted to put that out there. You also get a team-wide EM boost from the 2 Dendro unit resonance, but I can't really give credit to the team comp for that. That's just kind of in general, so yeah. Honestly, I'm kind of trying to grasp at straws here. The team functions decent enough. I just think down the road, when there's more Dendro units, this team will become a very niche pick. I at least hope so, because it functions, but it's not perfect. The last thing I want to mention is the general rotation I found myself in. It usually starts with DMC, skill, then alt, then Nilou, skill, then Kole, skill, then Kokomi, skill, then Kole, alt, then Nilou, alt, then Kokomi, alt, and from there, Kokomi a normal attacks to extend the E and then rinse and repeat. You want to keep in mind that Hydro triggers consume less of the gauge, so generally Hydro triggering means more bloom cores. Alright, so I've covered everything I wanted to, hopefully well enough. I kind of struggle with some parts just because of how difficult it can be to build for a character that seems to have been released 6 months early. But anyway, on to my conclusions if she's a good pull and whether I regret pulling for her or not. Starting with whether I regret pulling for her, I just want to say I have so much fun with these Bountiful Cores. The boom, 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 you know, the high damage. It's incredibly satisfying. So for me, I don't regret pulling for her because I actually have fun with her gameplay. Not every character I have fun with these days. I find myself usually in the same 2 or 3 team comps. So to add something new to the rotation, I'm very psyched about that. But I'm also painfully aware that if I didn't have all the necessary tools to use her well, I probably wouldn't find her as satisfying. So on whether I think anyone else should pull for her. I think it really depends on what their account is looking like, how they find Bountiful Cores to feel, you know, whether they enjoy the lore of the character, stuff like that. I can't say for sure whether you should pull for her. I think she'll continue to be more valuable as more Dendro units come out. So waiting for a rerun of her in 6 months or 7 months, hopefully not a year. Who knows when we'll get reruns, it's unpredictable, but you know what I mean. I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to skip her because she feels so out of place right now, and I don't think that's the wrong thing to do. I'm happy with her now, but I can understand why most don't have an interest in her. So, generally, it's up to you. Alright. Honestly, I've not made a video like this before. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. If anyone made it this far, I really want to thank you for watching. I plan on doing a few more videos like this, so if you did enjoy, maybe subscribe. Either way, just thanks for watching this one. And yeah, bye.